Started. This is the part two of an already dazzling and exciting session. So we'll let Adam kind of continue on. But where was it? We left off on kind of a cliff note. It was the pitfalls. Remember? We were like, hey, now for the pitfalls, and it was like, no, we gotta go. Everybody's got a meeting. I was like, no.
Yeah. So we could pick back up. I figure I'll do a quick recap on everything that we covered, just in case some folks are joining today weren't on that previous call, and then we can dive into the pitfalls, and then we can open it up for some like active discussion.
Sweet, nice, man. Yeah, we got a full hour. So, all right. Why don't we get started? Why don't we just do the recap, and then whoever joins us late, I'll just kind of admit them in, and they'll just wiggle their way in.
Cool. Go ahead and snag the screen share.
We're gonna do that. There we go. All right, you're good.
Thank you, sir. All right, cool. What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us. Just like I mentioned, I'm going to do a quick recap on the session that we did last week. We're not going to go into too much detail unless you guys are interested. Like, I'm more than happy to kind of loop back around and discuss everything that we covered again, or any of these topics if they are interesting for you guys. But we can use this as like an active discussion to kind of understand a little bit about what you guys are trying to solve for. And then we can actually jam out on like your particular use cases to make it as relevant as possible. Quick background on me for anybody who wasn't on the previous call. So co-founder and CEO of Partner.io. We're an account-based partnership tool that helps you co-sell with all of your different partners and not only manage those relationships, but also measure them and get attribution out of them. Hence why I'm hosting the attribution discussion. Also been involved in a couple different communities as well as the CSA and previously at a mobile first, or one of the leading mobile attribution companies, Branch Metrics, based out of Redwood City in California. So the topics that we're going to cover over here we covered on last week were basically an intro of attribution, a quick overview of what it means, more specifically when people think about it like from a sales attribution standpoint or like a partnership attribution standpoint. We covered some of the benefits. We covered some of the core KPIs, which predominantly revolve around like sourced or influenced revenue for, I'd say, like, upwards of 90% of organizations. And then we broke out a couple different methodologies on how to measure, both from like a basic setup for folks who are just getting started, an intermediate setup for people who, are looking kind of level up their game, and then advanced for people who are kind of looking at like the pro or expert edition. And where we left off was the actual pitfalls to avoid. So I'll go ahead and I'll jump to pitfalls to avoid, and we can tackle those real quick, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So the pitfalls that like I specifically wanted to discuss, and there's a bunch here, but these are the ones that I think are the most notable, is not focusing on attribution at all. Like, attribution is a hairy problem, particularly within partnerships. There's a variety of different ways you can do it. There's a variety of different methodologies and how you can use the attribution data. But the number one problem that I see out there is folks actually just like completely not focusing on attribution. And that's an incredibly big mistake, because if you can't measure it, then it's essentially, especially within like a larger organization, it's effectively like it didn't happen. So you're not going to be getting any credit for your work. You're not going to have the ability to understand what's driving, revenue or any type of outcomes at your organization. And therefore, if you're not tracking it, you're not actually going to be able to optimize how your go-to-market is in terms of, like which partners should you be working with, which partners should you be spending more of your time or your limited resources with. All of that is, you're not going to have any good answers to those questions if you're not actually tracking attribution at all. The second big pitfall to avoid, I think, is like lack of alignment and accountability. So this one's a big one that I see at a lot of organizations, where if your team internally, like usually it kind of stems from who you're reporting to at the partnership organization. So if you're reporting to sales or a CRO, obviously you have a stronger alignment with sales, or if you're reporting to product or marketing, like, you can lean more in that direction. But what I think I see the most successful organizations do is make sure that they have, alignment across all of those different parts of the organization. So you want to, even if you're just reporting into one, at the end of the day, the most successful partnership teams that I've seen and worked with are the ones who actually drive that cross-functional, type of alignment. And it's a lot easier said than done, because it takes a lot of, internal politicking, if you will, to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. But I do think that it's a task worth doing. And a good way that I've seen this done at a lot of places is actually just having folks are really kind of starting at the C level, getting your CEO and like the top level of the organization bought in on the value of partnerships. So that way you can really start, driving, or you really have like that actual support that's going to be beneficial, like as you continue to expand your program. The third piece that I'd say is no investment in tracking software, and that could be as simple as just a CRM, or it could be more complex, like as we discussed last week, like PRM, or like, an account-based partnership or co-selling platform. All of these are really important in terms of being able to actually understand, all of the attribution. So whether it's a basic CRM setup or even actually a step before that, as simple as just getting like, spreadsheets or an Airtable or something going, you're going to need to invest some time and resources at a minimum to make sure that you have the right technology, which is going to allow you to really scale your time. And then the next one is going, and we kind of touched on this one a little bit, but no assistance from product ops or engineering. This one's interesting in a couple different like viewpoints or different lenses, if you will. If there's the piece that we covered on where you want to have like that cross-functional alignment, but especially if you're going to be investing in like a solution, like a PRM or like another technology to help you track all of this, very similar to be like, how if marketing were to purchase Marketo, like it's not something that's going to be rolled out, overnight. There's obviously the integration component, which is something that you're going to need buy-in from your team on. But then there's also the enablement component of making sure that the teams like are actually understanding of what the technology is, what it does, how to use it, why they're using it. All of that is something that I think a lot of folks sometimes take for granted when they're purchasing any of this technology to track like all of their attribution, is they will sometimes like under index on really training the team. And like, I think the good mantra here that I've seen a lot of people do successfully is like, you tell somebody, then you tell them again, and you tell them again, then you tell them again, and then you tell them again, and then eventually they'll actually get it. So like, it really takes, particularly if you're working with like go-to-market folks on your team and trying to get them to buy into any type of enablement. You really have to make sure that you continue to hammer it home, because just like partnership folks, like everybody else in the organization is trying to juggle like 1,000 things at any one given time. So it has to be, dead simple. And usually the best way to do that is also put it in the framework of like why it's going to be impactful for them and how it's going to help them. And last but not least is the potential for channel conflict. So when you start getting your attribution up and running, and especially if you're coming from an organization that really didn't have like a core fundamental, like, partnership attribution strategy previously, it's probably going to be like their attribution or the sales attribution at that point in time is probably going to be over indexing heavily on the sales or marketing side. And what that means is that sales and marketing is going to be used to taking the credit for all of those different touch points. So now, when partnerships start getting involved, like there is going to be a different lens that's going to be put on it, which means that depending on which kind of attribution model that you're using, especially if it's like a last touch model and not more of a multi-touch model, there is going to be like channel conflict, which means that you might like claim credit for a particular deal, whereas marketing is going to say they drove it, or the SDR is going to say that they drove it. This is usually, like I mentioned, like a derivative of like a last touch model. So when we talk about last touch, that's okay. The last person to interact or a first touch model, either one of these, like because they're indexing so heavily on just one touch point, they're really prone to kind of like that internal channel conflict where people at your organization will like say that they drove that particular type of like whatever conversion event is, whether it's a sign up or, any type of downstream action. But the way to kind of circumvent this, or I'd say the best way to circumvent this is kind of using a different type of attribution modeling in terms of like an actual multi-touch model, where even if marketing or sales, and partnership all got, involved on driving like a particular outcome or like or a sign up at the organization, you each kind of get credit there versus just giving one department all of the credit. So there's a lot of nuance in that too that I'm happy to speak to, but I know I've been talking for a little bit here, so let me stop for a second and open it up, whether on the pitfalls to avoid or even just the attribution methodology and everything else, like more broadly. Any questions so far or anything you guys want me to elaborate on?
What are some of the factors you use to determine like the weighting in a weighted credit model or weighted attribution model?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So that's where I think like a lot of what we've been focusing during these discussions on is really more of like the science. I'd say that is really where more of the art comes in. And it's going to vary depending on every single business. And the way to like, I mean, having done this firsthand, building that type of a model at Branch, like, it's not an easy process. There's a lot of politics because you have to sit down, cross-functionally across each one of the orgs. I'll tell you exactly how we did it, but just like, like the pitfalls here that you want to avoid are just making sure that, you can get everybody in the same exact room, having everyone kind of like speaking the same language. It's going to take you a couple iterations. You're not going to get it right on the first time because each department's going to over-index on like that their touch points are the most important. So if you're saying like an email is worth 1 point, marketing is going to say like, hey, their case study being read might like be 8 points. And you're like, okay, why is that 8 points? Like if my email is only 1 point. And a partnership introduction, getting all of those different like point systems to align is something that like my recommendation and the way that I've seen it done best is one, have each one of the departments put together what their points are in like their silos, have them like, say, hey, here's the rough idea on like what a point system should be, 1 to 10 points. Only the most impactful things should be on the higher end of that, and then the lower, more transactional things should be on the lower end of that. Once they go through that, you're going to want to have somebody like, whether it be sales ops, rev ops, or somebody like that, who's kind of like more of a neutral third party, review all of that and flag anything that's like materially off base. And once they do that, then you kind of go back and you have everyone sit down in like the same room. And if there are any discrepancies, and by the way, have them review, like once the sales ops team sees it, have everybody review it from their respective departments, and then sit down in that meeting, and then they can kind of hash out anything and basically have defend why that they're taking like a stance on every single, like point structure. That's good. I mean, again, like you're still probably not like, even when we did that, and just to give you a timeline, like that took us, a couple months, that entire exercise that I described at Branch. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We've since really like started honing that over the course of time. So as you start getting that attribution model running, you're going to see, okay, like this seems a little bit off. Why? Let me peel that back and start, reevaluating the numbers. So you'll continue to hone that. And I'd say like soup to nuts. I mean, we were probably like between 6 to 9 months of, like honing that model to get to the point where like it was actually something that was like, okay, everybody like really believes in the model, and it's like spitting out the accurate outcome based upon like all the different touch points that it's seeing.
Can I ask, and you can dodge the question, but was all that effort worth it versus just doing like an even attribution model with a fraction of that kind of work?
Yeah, good question. I 100% think it's worth it because like you're avoiding like channel conflict. Everybody, like once people are in agreement, um, there's a lot of benefits, both in terms of just giving people the right credit. Like we compensate our teams now using that type of attribution, and more importantly, it's like it actually, when done right, it can be used in a predictive manner as well. So we now know like what are the individual touch points across the entire organization, partnerships, marketing, and sales, that are most predictive of like the most successful deals at our company. So without that type of analysis or that type of model, like we would kind of still be flying in the dark in terms of what's actually going to drive the most, benefit. But now, like I'm just going to use random things because I can't share like the exact details. But like for example, marketing knows that it's like, okay, 2 case studies, a webinar, and then like a webinar follow up has the highest predictability of like a lead converting or like a qualified lead converting. Whereas sales knows that it's like, okay, send 3 emails, get them on a meeting, like has like the highest, like these are just examples, but when you're measuring each one of those, like you can do a regression analysis on what has been the most successful historically, which you can start using in more of like a predictive manner.
Super helpful.
Go ahead, Gene.
No, nothing else from my side.
Adam, I would also imagine like kind of going through this process of attributing those points, like going through it would provide a little more transparency and understanding across departments of, where everything lies. So like, I think there's kind of seems like there's additional benefits beyond like what your actual mission is. It's like, it's getting everybody on the same page, understanding, yeah, this is what we do. This is how much what we do think is worth. And then kind of making sure that everybody's aligned around that. I see it as being such a painful process because, like you said, it's not directly correlated with their day-to-day. Like, this is what our deliverables are this week, this month. It's like this is an add-on thing that we get. It's like kind of, I don't know. It's painful to get there, but once you're there, it does add value. So I see the importance of like getting that buy-in from higher up to say, listen, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a little bit painful, but here's what we're going to get out of it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think like, I mean, it's a good point, is like everybody's going to derive some special benefit from this, that like each department, like I mentioned earlier, sales will now have a better idea of how they need to sell, to close their deals. Marketing will know what cadences work best. Partnerships will be able to know which partners are most impactful, where they should be focusing their time and like their limited resources. But also, like, I mean, like the most important thing is, because it's something that's not necessarily like a short-term fix, nor is it going to be like, completely accretive, like right from the start. Like it has to be spearheaded by somebody senior in the organization, because it could take some time, and it's not going to show results right off the bat. So, the folks who will usually be the ones who are most going to champion this is going to be like your revenue leader, like a CRO or a head of sales. Because once, like for them specifically, then the core benefit that they will usually want is to really have a much better understanding of this, like holistically from like the top down pipeline level. So when they're, any type of revenue leader, CRO, head of sales, like when they get their, and it's going to be coming up, right now for the next calendar year, they're going to have the CEO come to them and say, hey, next year you got to drive $75 million worth of revenue, and their next thing is okay, where is this going to, like, where am I going to get the 75 million? And that's like when you have a model like this, then you can know, okay, my sales team is going to be responsible for 40 million of that. My marketing team is going to be responsible, for like, 20 million of that. And my partnership team is going to be responsible for like 15 million of that. And being able to kind of use this type of a model is going to actually allow them to not only properly kind of allocate the goals for each individual team, but also throughout the course of the year, like, these models can be run in real time. Like they can know, how they're tracking against those goals and see who's performing, like who's overperforming, who's underperforming. So I mean, we covered a little bit on the top-down benefits and like like the CRO is going to be the ones who's probably going to be driving this, but then there's also the benefits on the bottoms-up side too.
Adam, you might have mentioned that before, but I'm just trying to see how tactical we can get with this. But on the point system, I know you said, give it to each department and kind of be like, okay, like think about how much is this action, how many points it's worth. But did you start with any sort of template or something that you kind of hit back with and said, look, the way I see it here, the 10 activities that you guys do, I don't know what the points are, kind of just throw some numbers on, here's kind of what I thought, or like what level of what starting point did you give each department and kind of putting these points together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that it worked for us specifically, and it could be done in different ways, but I'll speak with like my experience, is like I mentioned, like the revenue leader was the one who spearheaded the project. Our Rev Ops or Sales Ops team was the one who went back and basically took the first stab, like using the existing data that we already had, and was like, okay, cool. Like it looks like, these are going to be the rough, point systems that like will kind of line up with what we've seen historically. So they're the ones who are kind of gonna the first like put together like a little bit of that, and then they hand it over to the individual departments. But that's
and then
when
departments kind of added like, oh, this is
Yep.
missing, or like, we don't really do this, or and that
Exactly.
process, I think you said 2 months roughly to get a kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like that process, I'd say the initial process of getting to the point where the handoff was made was probably about I'd say 1 to 2 month process. It could have been done slightly faster, but obviously RevOps has a lot of other competing priorities. Yeah.
Did you immediately sort of tie individual employees' incentives to this model, or did you let it exist and be refined before tying it to motivating people's behavior?
Yeah, another great question. So the latter. Because from the beginning, like especially if you're going to be comping out your team, like you need to make sure that the model is really like working well. So I don't think it was until like probably 3 months in to actually utilizing the model that we even entertained the idea. And then like from that standpoint, like you have to adjust, like some of the internal like goaling and all that. But we waited a little bit to make sure that the model was, accurate. And that's when we made the switch to compensating the team based upon the data.
Oh, we're good.
Cool. I mean, so that's the entire presentation. I know that, I mean, so that kind of wraps up that. The remainder of the time here, and Evan, you can keep me honest if you want to take this in a different direction, but I was planning on using it to just, use it as an open forum. And we can discuss any of the challenges that you guys are experiencing. I can't promise you that I'm going to have all the answers, but I can promise you that I'll do my best to tell you how I would handle it, just given the experience that I've seen. So.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got lots of time here. So if anybody has any specific questions, I'll open it with one that just kind of been burning me, but anybody can think about the next one. Like you kind of mentioned the internal buy-in there and getting kind of shopping around the different departments and kind of, playing the politics side of things. I mean, I think there's a lot there, and there's some people that are not good at it, some people that just don't like doing it, some people that feel it's a waste of time, and some people that think it's absolutely crucial. I do think it's crucial, and I think there's a balance between like spending too much time on it. Like, can you comment a little bit like what your approach is to that? Like, is it literally going from department to department, here is how this is going to help you, or is it more or less like, here's how it's going to help us, which is going to help you? Like, what's your approach to kind of selling it across departments?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, there's the rule with the iron fist approach, where it's just this is, and that's usually more of the top down approach, where somebody for like senior in the organization is saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, like, and everybody has to do it. But like even as part of that, there's still obviously the selling component on people understanding, okay, why are we doing this, and like why it's important to them. So like I could speak specifically to kind of our experience, and once that decision was made, like there definitely was a lot of thought and like presentations across departments on the kind of the value and the why we're doing this. But then you also really had to kind of hammer home, like during the enablement phase, of like what's going to be like what each team is going to kind of get from this. And even that is something like that's you know, like, to be clear, is a little bit of like a, you know, a moving target, in the sense that, you know, what your hypothesis going into it, like you need to be flexible enough to understand like that might change, because a lot of the variables and stuff, like for us as we were going through that process, we even realized like there were other variables that we weren't accounting for, or other like, you know, data sources that would kind of now allow us to further hone our model, that we didn't even know, like, you know, these particular teams were using. So being able to kind of, you know, pitch folks on just the macro reasons why, or pitch each department on the macro reasons why, while still being flexible enough to kind of adjust like the methodology and everything that you're doing. I'd say like that's a little bit of the balance that needs to be struck.
I'd imagine it's like kind of an ongoing process too, because things change and you got to keep them kind of bought in, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, you know, once, I think that most folks will understand it once it's, you know, pitched in the proper, you know, in the proper light, because there are just so many benefits for, you know, for the entire organization as a whole and each individual department. So I still think like it's ultimately the right decision, but it's okay. Like, how do you go across like the execution of bringing it to life in like the most seamless way possible? That's more of like, I'd say, the difficult part than necessarily the pitch.
Thanks.
Cool. Anybody else figuring out?
Mic's not working, buddy. I see you talking, but you're not. Oh, he's gonna do it in the chat. Anybody got any questions? Man, there's a lot of good stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah, while Ty's putting everything together. I mean, so what we can also, let me just see, it looks like.
There we go. What would you suggest as an MVP attribution approach to very early days? Yeah, I mean, it keeps going back to like, if somebody's literally wants to have this type of model and launch it and have what you see there. I mean, we talked about it last session, you know, it's not something you can do overnight, but maybe kind of comment on that. Like, hey, like somebody wants, you know, version 1.0 of this, you know, where should they start? You know, where should they go? What should they focus on?
Yeah, 100%. And Ty, shout out to you. Nice, congrats on the new job, man. But yeah, so in terms of how to measure it from like a basic standpoint, so I think the number one thing that I was mentioning is just the measuring at all. You know, like I think the number one thing that I see with most organizations is like they're like, or the biggest pitfall to avoid is just not measuring anything. And when you think about like the most basic type of setup, like I think the most important thing is to track just like sourced attribution. How you do that can be done in a variety of different ways. Like it could be as simple as a spreadsheet or like an Airtable. And partnerprograms.io actually does they have like this really cool Airtable PRM type management system that they put together. But you know, tracking it, whether it be in spreadsheets, Airtable, or even just tracking it like in your CRM, is like, I'd say, the most basic way of doing things. Once you actually get this data in here, even if you're just looking at source, like that will at least like I mean, you can always export that data into like a certain type of sales attribution model. It's not going to give you the full picture because sourcing is like only going to be a subset of the value that the partnership organization is driving. So like I'd say, while it would be a start, you'd really want to quickly kind of, you know, advance that model towards more of like the sourcing and influencing components. And the influencing components are what's going to start to show you a little bit more of like the full funnel picture. So those are kind of the two things that, like, I'd say as you get started, like kind of the areas to be mindful. And Evan, I can't see the chat, so if anybody else is saying anything else in the chat, feel free to call it out.
I'm just looking at Ty with an earthquake there of switching audio. I think you've got audio now, buddy.
Awesome.
Yes.
Sorry, guys. I just flipped to mobile so I can chat. That was super helpful, Adam. Yeah, and specific use case for me, of course, started a new role here. Partnerships are brand new. Previously, I had a longer runway to kind of line up ducks in a row. I obviously went with Partner Stack at Unbound, so I was able to kind of get ahead of things, and it just fit very, very well. But in this testing mode, where we only have a very small handful of potential channel partners, like under 5. But what I need to get up and running like as soon as possible is like, what is the influence this current partner ecosystem is having on our deals? We're not even tracking that, right? Like, we've had partners bring us clients. We've had to bring, partners in to service some customers. Like at baseline, I need to know, like, where are we at right now? Like, what is the influence of partners on the ecosystem, our customer base now? Because there is influence. So what I've done early is just work with our Salesforce admin to just be able to tag, we create a specific field to say if it's partner, and then just be able to tag if it's influencer or source. So that's the best we can do from now moving forward, I think.
Yeah, that's the most common way of doing it. So I think to your point, Ty, like, the sourcing itself is definitely the easier one to track because it's fairly, it's binary. They either sourced it or they didn't. So that one's pretty simple. The influence, though, like, and I'm a huge proponent here, especially having seen the data myself at this point, like, influencing could be just as impactful, if not more impactful. And like Jay McBain, if you listen to anything that like he's been putting out, like has mentioned this like multiple times, like the influencer, channel.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly impactful, but to your point, like quantifying it or like actually putting like real hard data behind it is definitely significantly harder than sourcing. The most common way that I've seen of that being done is exactly how you illustrated, like usually having something in the like in your CRM, like usually under that specific opportunity where you can just manually go ahead and tag it. And then in that case too, the one thing that I would say is if you're going to go that route, just make sure that you have like multiple different fields for influence, because it's going to be very frequent that multiple different partners will wind up influencing. So a mistake that I usually see is people, just because they have one field for sourcing, will put one field for influence. Whereas like influence, like you want to account for multiple different partners there. The biggest pitfall to avoid is that because it's a manual process, you have to be very, very deliberate about who's going to actually be inputting that. Is it the partner manager? Is it the sales team? And make sure that that's properly being audited. I find that the more successful folks are usually the ones who have the partner managers doing it, because the partner managers are going to care about that data more. And like the AEs usually don't have much skin in the game in terms of giving the partner credit. So they may do it like maybe, 50% of the time at best. So yeah, like the number one thing that I would say is like, okay, yeah, have multiple different fields there. Make sure that, I would probably err towards having the partner manager fill it out. But there's also other ways of accounting for this. That's more of like the expert level, Ty, which I'm happy to kind of take offline too, or discuss now, like whatever you guys want to do.
This is a question I've been having listening to these conversations that I'm trying to get more sharp on. So one of the things that I see people doing that I think is a mistake is only tracking partners as those who would literally get on a phone with you. But that is irrelevant because your customers don't care about you at all. So we used to track everything. So sometimes customers are working with partners and they're not going to, like, from their point of view, like service partners, they're not going to be your partners, but they're working through like an agency. And that's still part of the agency marketing program, is to acquire those people who are going to influence you or bring you into contracts. We still wanted to measure that. Like you may have one source of truth that you're manually intervening, but we used to use every form of data set to map what's actually going on in the market and attribute it to these kinds of partners and channels. So is it but we're like, we had pretty intense analytics teams at FreshBooks and Alert. So I'm just wondering what people are doing now in 2020, if there's a ways of making this more efficient.
Yeah, Sunir, I'm actually curious to get your take on how you did it, because I know you and I were slacking after the previous session. And to be honest, I don't have as much experience in that, because a lot of the discussions that we'll typically account for, at least for, I mean, branch, which is a, top down, like enterprise sales, B2B, type sale. We are usually hopping on the phone or have some different touch point with the partner. So for us, it's much easier to account for that. Whereas like, I can totally understand, like, I mean, regardless of the model, actually, even in this type of a model, or even in more of like a transactional type sale, that finding that other additional layer of influence is also incredibly important. I just don't have a concrete way, or at least off the top of my head, of like, accounting for that. So I'm curious how you guys did it at FreshBooks.
Yeah, like I think I've been threatening to create another one of these masterminds, or just a place where we can brainstorm and see if we can work on it together as a group around the shadow channel, because this is actually a bigger part for most of us, is getting our heads around this and reporting up to the CFO our impact on the shadow channel. Those who won't be a partner because they don't want to talk to us, because these companies sell time and we waste their time, but we still need to work on our marketing to get them to bring us into their client contracts. Those are important. So the number one things we did was ask the customers who are signing up, because they're the ones who are doing the purchasing. Those are the ones we have the ability to talk to. How did you hear about us? We put that on the sign up form. And I have fought endlessly about this field, because people argue every field on the form lowers conversions. How did you hear about us? Actually slightly increased conversions, meaning it had no real impact. We A/B split tested, and 50% of the people answered it. It was just a short text field. It wasn't even a drop down, which I don't think is a good idea. I think you should have a short field. And then we did we went through it and coded it by hand. I mean, we got better at using keywords and search and filter that automatically. I mean, I can code, so we just did that, improved that over time. But even with a sample, you can do a projection of how many people are coming from partners. And then we also asked customers when they signed up, are you buying this, are you buying it for yourself, or are you buying it on behalf of a customer, trying to see if it's a partner signing up for the customer rather than the customer themselves, because that often happens. Or if you're buying it for yourself, are you relying on another company to manage this account for you, to see if they're going to bring another company in to manage it for them, right? Because they may be signing up, but they don't want to deal with the account, right? So
how did you, I think that's a great way of doing it. That makes a lot of sense. I guess the question that I have is that how did you get that, like, how did you use that data in tandem with all the other attribution data that you were getting, like the transactional attribution data, or like your, sourcing and like influencing data?
How did I do it? Well, I wrote the data warehouse and all the analytics code and and the regression models and everything, but that's not a normal person. I mean, what do we do with it is, we just put it into like some kind of data set, probably a spreadsheet somewhere. Mm-hmm. Or I had access to the database because I wrote the database. It's like I used like Postgres or something. So I just pulled the data sets, but I'm sure you could just dump it somewhere. It's just a form field, so it can go somewhere, anywhere. A Google spreadsheet, who gives a crap, right? And then your team can just go through and use it. For starters, start with that, and then then you improve it over time. You code where there's value, right? But you can do something to collect the data, see where it ends up. If it's worth investing more time in, you can do more engineering. The main thing was, like, once you started seeing that, then you would talk to these customers. Oh, you're working with somebody. You have to give them something of value. It's like, okay, well, you're not onboarding this account. Would you like to send them an email so they have the onboarding package? So you can put that in the user sign up flow as well. You see this, send email this to your developer, right? Then you start seeing who the developers are, right? It may be someone internally, same domain. It could be someone with a different domain. Oh, it could be a partner, right? And
did you weight that, like, so I guess like the shadow channel, data that you were collecting, did you weight that like equally, less, more than like, the other attribution data, or like, or like how did you think about that?
Well, I don't think about partnerships the way a lot of people think about partnerships. So my view about partners is that from the customer, the goal of the partnership team is every time you need a relationship, you have a relationship to manage with another human being in order to get your brand in that place where the customer is looking for reference information for a purchase. Partnership team's responsibility is get your brand there, whatever that takes. The range of tactics vary depending on the kind of company you're working with. but it doesn't matter. So to me, I don't really care if we have a direct co-sale or relationship with a partner. I want to know my brand is there. I want to know my name is coming up in those conversations, because that's how you win the market. It's not exactly about, whether they literally sign a master service agreement with me. It's just actually more time wasting, right? I don't really care. I want them talking about us. So we're just measuring how much of the percentage of our traffic was coming from this channel. We want to see that traffic increase over time. And then some we needed to be on the phone with, and some they use referral links, and some who cares, they were just talking about us. All those were fine, but we want to see the numbers go up in general.
Here's a question. Are any of the PRMs or any tools out there like that you've seen, either of you two, I guess, or anybody on the line, that that kind of play with this kind of partner attribution model a bit better than the others? Like, it's not, I mean, PRM as a product hasn't been around for that long, and then the features that go along with it haven't been here for that long either, and it's constantly evolving. But this is such an important piece of the successful partnership department. And other than like, oh yeah, we integrate with Salesforce, but then you need Salesforce. Like, is there any PRM or tool that you saw that kind of has, not to like put anybody like as a pitch or something, because they're all part of the CSA, but is anyone that you've seen that are just like, yeah, you know what, like they're trying to figure it out at least, and it sounds like it's getting there, or somebody that has figured it out? Has anybody seen anything?
Sunir, I'd be curious to get your take. I mean, my short answer is I don't think anybody yet. I mean, usually the flow that I see is that any of these tools will like, dump the data back into the CRM or like a data warehouse, which is usually the primary source of truth. And they kind of use that to cleanse all the data. And then they'll export that into like a Visible or an Engagio, where they'll run like the sales attribution modeling on top of it. That's my current experience. Sunir, gut check me here and keep me honest.
I think you're right. So like my view is that the correct analytics stack is that you have the customer life cycle, because the customer is a customer. It doesn't make a difference. They have to go through the same life cycle of your product. So, demand, like conversion, onboarding, upsell, referral, retention. Those are the same numbers, no matter how the customer came on board. And then the partner activities drive down into that core life cycle somewhere.
Samir said his Wi-Fi sucked, and here's the proof.
Yeah, well, Sunir,
just before the session, he was like, "My Wi-Fi sucks. Watch out." And I was like, "Yeah." Sunir, are you back?
I don't know. Am I?
Yeah, you're
I can
back.
hear you.
Oh, okay. So what the companies where I worked is we'd set up the life cycle of the customer analytics. You need to have that first. If you don't have that, you're going nowhere. Okay, because that is the core of it. And then all the partner activities, we drove into the various aspects of the customer lifecycle where they had an impact. So it doesn't have to be demand, although that's probably the ones we care about the most. Could be onboarding, could be retention. For integrations, it was retention. We have to track that. That was really important. And then I actually factored it out. So I had a report of every channel, including the ads and everything, of the LTVs and the conversions and the rates and all these stats per channel. And then we just laid up all the channels, and I had a data warehouse where I could slice and dice it. But I mean, as terms of like outside tools, I haven't used Engagio, but any of these attribution tools that connects with the underlying lifetime value of the account, that's really all you need. I mean, then the partner attribution is just another tag, right? So I haven't used Engagio, but I assume that would solve the problem, or maybe Tableau.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, any of the Engagio, Visible, any of those tools, like, I mean, they're only as good as the data that you're funneling in there, and then you can make that model, however you want to. So I think to your point, I mean, being able to actually aggregate all that data, make sure that it's properly stored and then get it in there is just step one, and then you can run any type of modeling on top of it. But Evan, yeah, good question. I don't know. I don't think I think that's what's interesting about just the partnership tooling in general, is that there's just a lot of fragmentation in the space. So a lot of these things just need to play nice in the sandbox together, at least in the meantime. Maybe over the next couple of years, there might be some more end-to-end solutions.
Hopefully, Adam, you'll solve with your company. I almost went down this path. One of my ideas before I started AppLine of the three was the analytics stuff. And I decided that we needed more customers before we need more data. So I went down the AppLine route. But
we're not there yet. But hopefully sometime in Q1 or Q2 of next year. Shameless plug.
Well, tell them what you're doing.
I mean, for us, yeah, to the point is like easily visualizing all of this and understanding the attribution is requiring a lot of different tools, a lot of different connectors and all that today. So like for us on the partner.io platform, like we have like a subset of the attribution data, but also going to build out data connectors with a lot of different PRMs and stuff like that, so that you can actually easily visualize this in a way that like a layman, not a Sunir, computer software architect guru, like your layman person can actually go ahead and just use any of these attribution models. So that's something that's it's on our short-term roadmap, and we'll definitely be rolling that out in early next year.
So does anybody else have a specific question? I mean, you're on a call here with like 10 of your colleagues going through this. Is there anybody that has a specific challenge that they're actually just trying to tackle right now that you need a few years on? Ty, I know you mentioned you're about to launch something. Kelly, anybody get a challenge? Not to put you on the spot, you don't have to, but
let's put them on the spot though. It's fun. It's much more fun.
It's the only way to do it. It's like you've got 10 people that are probably the most experts at this thing.
I can put behind the spot.
Willing to help.
I have one, but I'm just too early. We're just starting. So for now, it's going to be like really the basic with the source. The attribution is going to come later. The other challenge I have with that, and I'm trying to convince my leadership, is because it's push from sales, they're really just focused on getting the source metric. I've not convinced any of them that we also need to measure attribution, retention, if there's churn definition, all those are going to impact much more the business, as much as the business as the source we get from partner. That's my opinion. I haven't measured it yet, but that's why I'm trying to evangelize around attribution, that not only we need to do the source, but all the influence over time. And it's not easy. I mean, that's not something you can do like this. But.
No, well, hopefully give you some ideas here.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, like, I mean, even if it's like the manual process in the meantime, like, what could be helpful to make your internal case on why you need to invest more in that is just like, pop open an Airtable or a spreadsheet and just start tracking it on the side. And that way, in a couple of months or like at the end of the quarter, you're able to actually say like, hey, this is all the data that I'm getting. I'm doing it in an incredible manually way right now. But like clearly these partners are impacting each one of these deals. In order for like me to understand where I need to invest more of my time or your team's time, now I want to invest a little bit more in actually building out that infrastructure. So like, I mean, sourcing is usually where a lot of teams will start. But I think that it's, primarily because like, I don't want to say lack of education, but I think it's more so like lack of understanding of how impactful the actual influence is. And if you could start putting real data behind that, I think that it will help like, start like building your business case internally a little bit.
Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, that's more or less my plan. It's just going to take, the time to do it and go there.
But yeah, if any of these resources or anything could be helpful, like, I mean, feel free to ping me in the CSA. I can help you on the side too.
Thanks.
Adam, is there anything that you have, I don't want to call it a template for because that's not what it is, but anything that around this point system that we can use to play around with? I'm not telling you to give what you have in turn, because it's not going to be applicable, but is there anything that you've come across? If you do, just take a look around. Maybe we can share with the group to be like, hey, listen, like here's a rough kind of grid of what you should be thinking about when building this point system, because I feel like that's like the foundation of this thing. If you can build that out, then you can see, okay, what tools can we plug into it, go sell it to different departments. But it all kind of starts with like, okay, we need to build something like this, and here's what it looks like, so that people can understand what it is that you're about to embark on, right? But yeah, take a look around.
That's a great point. So I just added something to my to-do list. I'll send that over to you, Evan, and then we can post it in the members channel if you'd like.
Yeah,
I'm gonna anonymize everything and just make it so that like you can't see the points or anything, but I'll make it so that like you guys can understand all the different touch points and everything.
Yeah, because I mean, it'd be like even if you went out to Google World and just try to, find the stuff, you're not going to find it. It doesn't exist. Like it's really tough to find this type of information. So even if it's just like a photo of like, here's what the destination looks like. It's going to take 3 months of work, and but here's what we're going to end up with, and here's how it's going to help us. I think it'll be helpful for people on this call, but also I think a lot of people that couldn't make it as well. So we'll circle back on that. Does anybody, last call for any questions? We got a few minutes if anybody has got a burning question they want to answer. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and take the conversation on Slack if everybody's all right. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, Adam, thanks again. Part 2, it's a wrap. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining me, and we'll continue to chat on Slack.
For more great insights on partnerships and software, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.